During the Victorian era, memento mori photography became a common way for grieving families to remember their loved ones. Because photography was expensive and rare, families would often pose the recently deceased in lifelike positions, sometimes using special stands to keep the body upright or painting eyes onto closed eyelids. These haunting portraits often featured children or entire families sitting alongside a deceased relative as if they were still part of the household. In the Capuchin catacombs of Palermo, Italy, there are approximately 8,000 corpses and 1,250 mummies lining the walls. Unlike traditional burials, these bodies are not in coffins but are dressed in their finest attire and organized by status, gender, and profession. Some are so well preserved that they still have hair and skin, hanging from hooks or sitting on benches in a macabre display that has stood for centuries. A rare and grisly phenomenon known as coffin birth or post-mortem fetal extrusion occurs when a pregnant woman dies and the buildup of natural gases inside her body during decomposition creates enough pressure to expel the fetus from the womb. While extremely rare in modern times due to chemical embalming, archaeologists have discovered several instances in ancient graves where a mother was buried with a fetus positioned between her legs, occurring days after her death. In 1518, a dancing plague struck Strasbourg, France, where hundreds of people began dancing uncontrollably for days on end. This wasn't a celebration. The victims were in clear distress, screaming for help while their feet bled. Many eventually died from heart attacks, strokes, or pure exhaustion. To this day, historians debate whether it was caused by mass hysteria or ergot fungus poisoning. The Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic, known as the Church of Bones, contains the remains of between 40,000 and 70,000 people. In the 19th century, a woodcarver was hired to organize the massive heaps of bones, and he chose to create macabre art. The church features a massive chandelier containing at least one of every bone in the human body, as well as bone-encrusted walls and even a coat of arms made entirely of skeletal remains. Scaphism was an ancient Persian method of execution designed to be as slow and agonizing as possible. The victim was trapped between two hollowed-out logs or boats, with only their head and limbs protruding. They were force-fed milk and honey until they developed severe diarrhea, and then smeared with more honey to attract insects. The victim would eventually succumb to gangrene, dehydration, and being eaten alive by maggots over several weeks. In certain regions of Tibet in Mongolia, the practice of sky burial involves leaving the bodies of the deceased on mountain peaks to be consumed by vultures. In Vajrayana Buddhism, the body is seen as a discarded shell after death, and offering it to the birds is considered a final act of generosity and a way to sustain other living creatures while allowing the soul to move on to its next incarnation. Sokushin Butsuwa was a practice among Japanese Buddhist monks where they would attempt to mummify themselves while still alive. Over several years, they followed a strict diet of nuts and seeds to strip the body of fat, followed by eating bark and roots and drinking a poisonous tea made from the sap of the urushi tree. This tea caused vomiting and sweating to dehydrate the body and made the flesh toxic to maggots after death. During the French Revolution, the guillotine was considered a humane method of execution because it was intended to be instantaneous. However, witnesses often reported seeing the eyes and mouths of severed heads move for several seconds after the blade fell. Some doctors even performed experiments calling out the names of the condemned and claimed the eyes would occasionally focus on the speaker, suggesting a brief moment of consciousness post-decapitation. Deep beneath the streets of Paris lies a network of tunnels containing the bones of over 6 million people. Created in the late 17th century to solve the city's overflowing cemeteries, the Paris catacombs feature walls built entirely of skulls and femurs. The air inside is remarkably still, and the sheer volume of human remains creates a silent subterranean city of the dead that spans hundreds of miles. In the 19th century, hair jewelry became a popular way to mourn the dead. Since human hair does not decay, families would weave the hair of their deceased loved ones into intricate necklaces, rings, and brooches. These hair works were often incredibly detailed, featuring floral patterns or landscapes made entirely from the locks of the departed, serving as a permanent physical connection to someone who had passed away. The Hindenburg disaster in 1937 was one of the first tragedies to be captured vividly on film and broadcast via radio in real time. Because the airship was filled with flammable hydrogen, it took only 34 seconds for the entire vessel to be consumed by flames and crash to the ground. The morbid legacy of the event is tied to the haunting radio commentary of Herbert Morrison, who broke down crying as he witnessed people jumping from the burning wreckage. In ancient Rome, noble families would create imagines, which were lifelike wax masks molded directly from the faces of their recently deceased ancestors. These masks were kept in a special shrine in the home. During subsequent family funerals, professional actors would wear these masks and dress as the ancestors, marching in the procession to symbolize that the entire lineage was welcoming the newly deceased into the afterlife. In 1518, a dancing plague struck Strasbourg, France, where hundreds of people began dancing uncontrollably for days on end. This wasn't a celebration. The victims were in clear distress, screaming for help while their feet bled. Many eventually died from heart attacks, strokes, or pure exhaustion. To this day, historians debate whether it was caused by mass hysteria or ergot fungus poisoning. In Mexico, there's an island known as Isla de las Muñecas, or the Island of the Dolls. The former caretaker, Don Julián Santana Barrera, began hanging old, decapitated, and decaying dolls from the trees after finding the body of a drowned girl in the canal. He believed the dolls would appease her restless spirit. Over decades, hundreds of rotting dolls have accumulated, creating a terrifying landscape where the dolls are said to whisper and move their eyes. Before the invention of modern hearses, the Victorian era utilized highly ornate horse-drawn funeral trolleys. These massive black carriages were often adorned with heavy velvet curtains, plumes of ostrich feathers, and glass windows so the community could view the casket as a past. The number of horses and the height of the plumes were direct indicators of the deceased's social status, turning a funeral into a grand, macabre parade. In 1876, the legendary lawman and gambler Wild Bill Hickok was shot in the back of the head while playing poker in a saloon in Deadwood. At the moment of his death, he was holding a hand consisting of 2 black aces and 2 black eights, with the 5th card unknown. This combination has since been known globally as the dead man's hand, a grim symbol in gambling culture representing impending doom and sudden death. The gibbet of Montfaucon was a massive stone structure in Paris used for centuries to display the bodies of executed criminals. It featured 16 stone pillars and 3 levels of wooden beams, capable of hanging up to 45 bodies simultaneously. The corpses were left there to rot and be eaten by crows as a warning to the public. The stench was so powerful that it could be smelled from miles away, serving as a permanent monument to royal justice. The Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, was a popular artistic motif in the late Middle Ages, often painted on cemetery walls. It depicted skeletons leading people of all walks of life, kings, peasants, and popes, towards the grave. The artwork served as a stark reminder of the memento mori philosophy, that no matter your status in life, death is the great equalizer that eventually claims everyone in a final, inevitable dance. The Radium Girls were female factory workers in the 1920s who painted watch dials with self-luminous radium paint. Instructed to point their brushes with their lips, they unknowingly ingested lethal amounts of radiation. Their bones eventually began to disintegrate from the inside out, a condition known as radium jaw. Many of these women were so radioactive by the time they died that their bodies would cause Geiger counters to click through their coffin lids. Lake Natron in Tanzania is one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Its waters are so alkaline, with a pH as high as 10.5, that they can burn the skin and eyes of animals not adapted to it. When birds or bats crash into the lake, the high soda and salt content causes their bodies to calcify, perfectly preserving them in stone-like husks. These statues of deceased animals often wash up on the shore, looking like macabre fossils. Kuru is a rare and fatal brain disease that was once common among the Fore people of Papua New Guinea. It was spread through ritualistic cannibalism, specifically the eating of the brains of deceased family members. One of the primary symptoms of the disease was pathological bursts of laughter and emotional instability, leading to its nickname, the Laughing Death. The disease would cause the brain to become riddled with holes, much like a sponge. Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Soviet Union, died in 1924, but his body is still on public display in a mausoleum in Moscow's Red Square. For over a century, a team of specialized biological scientists has worked to maintain his corpse through a unique chemical embalming process. Every few years, the body is resubmerged in a bath of preservation fluids, and his skin is carefully moisturized to keep him looking as if he is merely sleeping. During the bubonic plague, plague doctors wore iconic bird-like masks that have since become symbols of death. The long beak was not just for show, it was stuffed with aromatic substances like dried flowers, lavender, and camphor. At the time, it was believed that the plague was spread through miasma or bad air, and the herbs in the beak were intended to protect the doctor from the stench and the perceived airborne poison of the dead. In the Tanah Toraja region of Indonesia, death is a prolonged process. Families often keep the deceased in their homes for months or even years, treating them as if they are merely sick. After an elaborate funeral involving animal sacrifice, the dead are placed in limestone cliff graves. Guarding these tombs are tau-tau, eerie, life-sized wooden effigies carved to look exactly like the deceased, staring out over the land of the living with fixed, unblinking eyes. In the late 19th century, the rise of airtight, protective coffins led to a gruesome problem: exploding casket syndrome. When a body is sealed in an airtight container, the gases produced during decomposition have nowhere to escape. The resulting pressure can become so intense that the casket literally ruptures or the lid blows off. Modern caskets now include burper valves, small rubber seals that allow gases to escape without letting the outside environment in. The Sedlec ossuary is not the only bone church in the world. The Czech Republic also houses the Brno ossuary, which was rediscovered in 2001. It contains the remains of over 50,000 people. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the bones were bleached and stacked into massive, meticulously organized pyramids. These structures fill the underground chambers, where the yellowed skulls of plague victims and soldiers sit in silent, symmetrical rows that stretch to the ceiling. In 1984, scientists exhumed the body of John Torrington, a stoker on the doomed 1845 Franklin expedition. Because he was buried in the Arctic permafrost, his body was perfectly preserved for nearly 140 years. When the coffin was opened, researchers were met with a terrifying sight. Torrington's eyes were wide open, and his skin was still intact, looking as though he had died just hours before. The discovery revealed that lead poisoning from canned food likely contributed to the crew's demise. The lead masks case is one of Brazil's strangest unsolved mysteries. In 1966, two men were found dead on Vintum Hill wearing formal suits and handmade lead eye masks. Beside them was a notebook containing a cryptic instruction: 1630, be at the agreed place; 1830, swallow capsules; after effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. There are no signs of violence or poisoning, and the reason they believed they needed lead masks to protect their eyes remains a complete mystery. The Igorot people of Sagada in the Philippines have practiced the tradition of hanging coffins for over 2,000 years. Instead of being buried in the ground, the deceased are placed in wooden coffins that are nailed or tied to the side of high cliffs. It is believed that the higher the body is placed, the closer the soul is to heaven. Many of the coffins are much smaller than a standard adult, as the bodies are often placed in a fetal position to symbolize returning to the womb. In the mid-1800s, French neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne conducted experiments on the facial expressions of human subjects using electrical currents. He would apply electrodes to the faces of living patients and even recently decapitated heads to trigger specific muscles, forcing the face into grotesque contortions of fear, pain, or joy. His photographs, featuring subjects with wide, terrified eyes and unnaturally stretched mouths, remain some of the most unsettling images in medical history. Every year, ghost ships wash up on the shores of Japan, often carrying nothing but the skeletal remains of North Korean fishermen. These wooden vessels are poorly equipped and often run out of fuel or lose their way in the vast Sea of Japan. By the time the boats drift into Japanese waters, the crew has usually succumbed to starvation or exposure, leaving behind a grim vessel of the dead that serves as a haunting reminder of the desperate conditions from which they fled. Diogo Alves was a notorious serial killer in 19th-century Lisbon who robbed and murdered 70 people by throwing them off a 100-foot-tall aqueduct. After he was caught and executed in 1841, scientists at the University of Lisbon decided to preserve his head in a glass jar to study his brain. To this day, the head sits perfectly preserved in yellowing formaldehyde, his calm, sightless eyes and pale skin greeting students and visitors with a frozen, macabre expression.